Today, football is the most popular sport in America. The whole family can head to the stadium on a Sunday, have wings, a soda, and feel the rush of excitement. But in the earliest days of football, the atmosphere was a whole lot different.
American football originates in the 1860s on college campuses, where young college men are sort of combining basically rugby, soccer, to form what we now think of as football. Football in this time period was very different from today's game. There was no forward pass. It was very much in the trenches. People slamming their bodies into each other.
They developed plays with names like the Princeton V and the Flying Wedge. And these plays are essentially just one team's players running at full force at the other team's players.
And that's when the brutality of the game really starts to come alive. We're putting all our weight together, increasing the power and the velocity with which this collision's gonna happen. Wearing nothing more than a sweatshirt and some pants.
These max momentum plays weren't just allowed, they were encouraged. Because of this, guys are getting injured, they're getting disfigured, they're getting crippled, or worse.
These players are playing without really any kind of protection. What little protection they have is extremely flimsy. It's horse hide, and they're stuffing textbooks down their uniforms. They're certainly not wearing helmets.
The grudge matches between Harvard and Yale make national headlines for their violence.
So in 1894, Harvard and Yale go head-to-head in what's considered the Hampton Park bloodbath. They would lock arm in arm and just ram at each other head first.
You have a guy that gets his nose broken. You have a guy break his collarbone, and another guy gets knocked out during a timeout. They think he might be dead. This was what was not only acceptable, it was what was required.
The president of Harvard, in an editorial titled "The Evils of Football," declares the game more brutal than cockfighting, bullfighting, and prize fighting.
The world heavyweight boxing champion at the time, John L. Sullivan, says, quote, "Football, there's murder in that game." Imagine how brutal it must be for a guy who punches people in the head for a living to think that sport is too dangerous.
At one point, the Chicago Tribune publishes a headline, "Football Year's Death Harvest." And in that article, they list 19 kids who've been killed playing football that year.
We're talking roughly 3 decades past the culmination of the Civil War. And here were young men going to die not on a battlefield, but on a football field.
So at this point in the game, editorials are calling for the sport of football to be abolished. So think about that. Decades before the NFL comes together, football could be banned in America. We wouldn't have the Super Bowl, we wouldn't have the playoffs, none of it. It could be erased from history. It actually takes President Teddy Roosevelt to save the game.
There's 18, 19-year-olds losing their lives, and you have to have the president say, we have to clean this game up. We have to get a hold of this game, or it's gonna have to go away.
He invites all the heads of every school to Washington, D.C. and says, you gotta clean up the rules and get better equipment.
And of all people, it's the Rough Rider himself, Teddy Roosevelt, who finds ways to modify this sport so that young men could play the game, enjoy the game, and still go home at the end of it.
The dangers in football have never been in doubt, but America's pastime, baseball, is known as a kinder gentleman's game, but it wasn't always that way.
In its early days, baseball isn't just aggressive, it's downright dangerous.
Everything was done barehanded. Balls would be coming at you at enormous speed, and you were expected to either catch, deflect, or bat away the ball with your bare hands.
Even in the latter half of the 1800s, when we had professional baseball, if someone wanted to wear a protective piece of gear, you'd be laughed at.
People in the stand would razz them and say they were cowardly and unmanly, but they actually needed protection.
These guys were just getting murdered by these line drives. They would have bruises, broken fingers, broken hands.
The fielders aren't the only ones in danger in old-time baseball. The original rules have a bit of dodgeball written in.
You could throw someone out by actually hitting them with the baseball itself. Now this would be considered assault. Back then, no, that was just part of the game.
They called it soaking or plugging, wherein you could hit the opposing player before they reached base safely.
Imagine getting, banged in the head by a ball. You're gonna see blood on the field. It had to look pretty rough as the day went on.
Right now, if you throw a pitch near somebody, it ends up in a fight. I can't imagine in today's game how many ambulances, how many fights there would be.
By 1845, soaking is eliminated from the game, though not everyone loves the rule change.
Fans aren't all happy about this. Some players aren't either. They think that it takes away from the manliness or the rough and tumble nature of the sport.
But fans don't need to worry. With this rule change, something lost is something gained.
Because you can no longer suffer the possibility of being hit with a ball, the type of ball that's used moves to a much harder ball, which is the hard ball that we now know today.
As balls become more tightly wound, the velocities imbued in these balls create legit danger to the catcher. Originally, catchers defended behind the plate without padding, without gloves, without masks.
They're suffering broken fingers, broken fingernails, bruises all over their hands. They would be hit kind of all over their bodies. If catchers are wearing any kind of padding, they're using things like sponges or raw meat or hay to kind of protect themselves from being hit with the ball.
In 1870, a catcher named Doug Allison decides he's had enough of it. He is sick of the injuries he has incurred behind the plate. So Allison takes to the field for the first time with the first glove, a buckskin mitten to protect his hand while he's behind the plate.
Allison's so-called glove looks less like a piece of sporting equipment and more like something you might wear to go sledding. And it gets an interesting nickname around the league, the sissy mitten.
So brutal and relentless are the taunts. Rather than continue to utilize his sissy mitten, Doug Allison continues the season without it.
Baseball continues to be played without gloves until one man takes a stand in 1877.
Ultimately, it took Albert Spalding, one of the best pitchers to ever do it, to say, no, I'm gonna protect my hand. And because he was a hero of the game, a lights-out pitcher for the Chicago White Stockings, no one says anything. No one's gonna mock the king.
He was the guy who made it cool for everyone else. Like, if Spalding's gonna wear a mitt, well, then I'll wear a mitt too.
Over the next decade, gloves become commonplace, and the equipment in the game keeps evolving, except for one position that still has no protection whatsoever.
Balls got harder, balls got tighter, pitchers got faster. So catchers are starting to develop mitts, pads, and face masks. But the batter is developing nothing.
And in August of 1920, the Yankees are playing Cleveland at the Polo Grounds. And shortstop Ray Chapman comes to bat against Yankees pitcher Carl Mays. Mays hurls a spitball at Chapman. It hits him square in the head.
People watching thought it hit his back. So much so that the pitcher fielded the ball and threw it to first base, while Ray Chapman lay there with blood coming out of his ears. And the next day, he dies in the hospital at 29 years old.
Unfortunately, after Ray Chapman dies, we don't see players wearing any kind of protective headgear for many, many years.
Consider this. Players start wearing cups in about 1904, yet helmets don't find their way into the game until 1940. It says a lot about the priorities of men.
Helmets themselves were not mandated by Major League Baseball until 1971, which is crazy to think about.
Once helmets were a must, baseball's wilder days were permanently taken out of the rotation.